All right, so we're going to be simplifying expressions with a distributive property today. And when I distribute, that means I'm going to pass out something. So when I pass out the number, I'm going to multiply by it. So when I'm talking about the distributive property, I'm also talking about multiplying. So an expression is in simplest form when it has no parentheses and all of the like terms have been combined. So you'll find that when we use our distributive property, sometimes it gives us something that we will then need to combine. So sometimes it gives us terms then that we need to combine. So when you see parentheses, you must use the distributive property. And you may remember using this in the past. Say you had a multiplication problem like 15 times 12. And you're like, well, I don't know what 15 times 12 is, but I can think of 15 as 10 plus 5, and then I can multiply both of those terms by 12. So 10 times 12 I know is 120, and 5 times 12 I know is 60, and that gives me 180. So very similarly, like we passed that 12 out, in other words, we multiplied everything by 12, I'm going to do the same thing over here. I am going to pass out the a to each of those terms. So I will have a times b, and I will have a times c, and since they are positive, I'm going to have a plus sign in between them. And remember that when two variables are next to each other, it means that I need to multiply them. That's a times b plus a times c. And I would need to, order of operations, multiply those before I could add them. So speaking of order of operations, sometimes I come across ones that have the numbers and only numbers, and there's no variables in there. There's no letters. So if there's just numbers in there, I can think of it like the distributive property, where I would say 2 times 3, and then 2 times 4, and I would get 6 and 8, and I'm going to add those together because they're both positive, and that gives me 14. Now, because we know order of operations, we could have also looked at that and said, maybe we should do parentheses first, and parentheses first tells me 7, so 2 times 7 also gets me 14. Now what we've been working with and what we're going to be working with are these times where we have a variable involved. And excuse me, we lost it when it, we'll choose 3. When we hole punched, we lost the 3 there. So when we have something with a variable in it, we cannot combine. We cannot combine the x and the 5. So the only option we have is to use the distributive property. So I end up with 3 times x and 3 times 5. And so I get 3x plus 15. And once again, I cannot combine the 3x and the 15. They are not like terms. I'm just done. And that is okay. It's just an expression. We're going to leave it like that. On this next one, you notice we have a negative out here in front of the 6. So we're not just going to multiply by regular 6. We're going to multiply by negative 6. Now, negative 6 times c is negative 6c. And we learned that negative 6 times 4 is negative 24. So minus 24. Our next one here, we're going to distribute a 12. And this is one I can think about a couple different ways here. So I can think of this as 12 times 4a and 12 times 6. I like to think of it, instead of saying, oh, I got to subtract what's over here, I'm going to just go ahead and think of that as a negative 6. So that when I do my multiplication, I end up with a positive or a negative number, and I'll know if I need to put an addition or subtraction sign in there. So 12 times 4 is 48a. 12 times negative 6 is negative 72. So it ends up being 48 minus 72. Moving along here, I've got negative 3 times 3f, and negative 3 times, like I said once again, I like to think of it as negative 2. So negative 3 times 3f, and negative 3 times negative 2. This is going to get me a negative 9, because a negative times a positive gives me a negative. And the negative 3 times negative 2 is going to give me a positive 6. Alrighty, so our next one, we are distributing a negative 7. And I would love it if you get to the point where you're like, I think I got this, pause this. Try out the rest of them, then turn it back on and check them. It's a very good way to see if you know what you're doing. So here I'm going to do negative 7 times 9 and negative 7 times 3a. Well, negative 7 times 9 gives me a negative 63. Negative 7 times 3 gives me a negative 21. So negative 63 minus 21a. This next one I could do two different ways. I could think of this and go, oh my gosh, there's 3 things. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter how many terms there are. There could be 18 terms. You would need to distribute to all 18 terms. So I need to do here 6 times b, 6 times negative 9, and 6 times 2b. Now when I do that, I'm going to get 6b minus 54, and then I get a positive 12b. And then you're going to think, oh, wait a minute, I need to combine like terms. So I have 6b plus 12b, which gives me 18b minus 54. Now, if you were an enterprising young student, you might have noticed that you could have combined like terms up here. So that would have been 6 times negative 9 plus 3b. When I distribute that, I'm going to get 6 times negative 9 still, and 6 times 3b, and I will still end up with, this would just give it to me in a different order, negative 54 plus 18b, which is the same thing as 18b minus 54. So these are the same thing. I've just flip-flopped the order. When you do that, you need to make sure the sign comes with the number. Our last 2 problems, I'm sure you're thinking, oh no, decimals, but you can do this. I am going to distribute. Remember, there's like a 1 here in front of the c that we don't write, so anytime it's like a 1 times anything would be itself. So in this case, I would have 0.2 times 1c, and 0.2 times 8. Well, 0.2 times 1 is just 0.2, so now I have 0.2c, or 2/10 c. When I do 2/10 times 8, I'm going to put the 2/10 on top just because there are more digits in 2/10. And then I'm going to do 8 times 2 is 16. Put down the 6, carry the 1. 8 times 0 is 0, and 0 plus 1 is 1. I then see that I have a 1 number behind the decimal. So I'm moving that over 1, and those were both positive, so my answer, when I put it in, is going to be plus 1.6. My next problem, same thing, I just have fractions, and if you feel comfortable reducing before you multiply fractions, it will help you. We've got 5/6 times 12b, and 5/6 times negative 36. Now you'll recall that I can make any number into a fraction simply by putting a 1 under it. If you want to sing that to yourself to the tune of Beyonce's "You Should Have Put a Ring on It." I won't horrify you by doing that now. But we're going to do 5/6 times 12b over 1. And we will do 5/6 times negative 36 over 1. Now I can cross-reduce these right here. I can divide both of those by 6. This becomes a 2, because 2 times 6 equals 12, so we divide it by 6. And 1 times 6 is 6, so we divide it by 6, we get 1. 5 times 2 is 10b over 1, which is just the same as 10b. Over here I can also reduce. When I reduce this, I got to make sure that I keep it negative when I reduce it. So 5 times negative 6 is negative 30 over 1, which just means minus 30. Now what you're going to find is on the back there are practice problems. And here's what I would like you to do. I want you to do these practice problems And I'm going to do the first couple, and then I'll turn it back on, and then I'll do the last 4. And I want you to turn it off, try them, turn it back on, and see if you got them right. So there you go. There are the first 6. So check those very carefully. Take note of the negatives and what is going on, and making sure that you are adding and subtracting in the right places. Check those over very carefully. Just pause it and check those out. And there's the last 4. So once again, pause it and check your answers. See if you got them right. Work back through it. Let me know if you think you see any mistakes. And be ready to put this skill to use tomorrow in class.